The sound of a marriage breaking is rarely a loud explosion. Often it is the quiet, humiliating thud of a heavy platinum credit card hitting a laminate counter, a sound that echoes with the finality of a gavel striking a judge's block. For James Sterling, standing under the unforgiving, sterile fluorescent lights of Terminal 4 on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, that sound marked the end of 3 years of silence and the beginning of a devastation he had seen coming but refused to acknowledge. He stood motionless, his hands buried deep within the kangaroo pocket of a charcoal gray hoodie that had softened with 5 years of washing, the fabric fraying slightly at the cuffs. To the passing travelers rushing toward their gates, dragging rolling suitcases and screaming children, James looked like nobody. A man who had given up, a man who was perhaps traveling for a family emergency or running away from a life he couldn't handle. He wore faded joggers and scuffed sneakers, his posture slumped not from a lack of spine, but from the exhausting weight of carrying a secret that was simply too heavy to explain to the woman standing next to him. That woman was Elena, his wife, who vibrated with a frantic, superficial energy that seemed to repel the very air around her. She was dressed not for a long-haul flight across the Atlantic, but for a runway appearance. A tailored cream blazer with sharp, aggressive shoulder pads, oversized designer sunglasses that shielded her eyes from having to make contact with the common folk, and stiletto heels that clicked against the linoleum floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking time bomb. They were heading to London for their 3rd anniversary, a trip James had quietly arranged and paid for, hoping that the romance of a foreign city might bridge the widening canyon between them. He had wanted this to be a fresh start, a chance to reconnect away from the noise of their daily lives in New York. But the canyon had only grown wider during the silent, suffocating 40-minute Uber ride to the airport, where Elena had spent the entire time scrolling through Instagram, sighing audibly whenever James tried to point out a landmark or ask about her day. Now, standing at the check-in counter, the distance between them felt unbridgeable. The airline agent, a woman named Patricia, with tired eyes and a tight, apologetic smile, typed rapidly on her keyboard before pausing with a frown that James knew all too well. "I apologize for the delay," Patricia said, her voice practiced but polite, the kind of voice used to deliver bad news gently. "Flight 808 to Heathrow is significantly overbooked in the main cabin today. It's a full house. However, due to a last-minute cancellation from a diplomat, we have exactly 1 seat available for an upgrade to first class. It's a complimentary upgrade for our platinum members, but, well, there is only one." James instinctively stepped forward, his body language opening up, ready to decline with a polite smile. To him, the answer was as obvious as breathing. Marriage was a partnership, a covenant of shared experiences. You suffer the cramped legs together. You share the armrest. You eat the stale pretzels together. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the solidarity. He opened his mouth to say, "We'll stay together, thanks. Put us wherever you can." But the words never made it past his lips. Elena moved with the speed of a viper striking in the grass. She snatched the heavy platinum credit card and her passport from the counter where James had placed them and slammed them down in front of Patricia. "I'll take it," she declared, her voice devoid of hesitation, devoid of guilt, devoid of even a second thought. The sound of her decision hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, causing the people in the line behind them to shuffle awkwardly. Patricia blinked, looking awkwardly between the husband in the hoodie and the wife in the blazer, her eyes widening slightly at the brutality of the moment. "Ma'am?" the agent asked softly, assuming she had misunderstood. "That would separate you. It's an 8-hour transatlantic flight. Most couples prefer to—" Elena cut her off with a laugh, a cold, brittle sound that shattered James's remaining hope like a stone through a stained glass window. "Oh, don't worry about him," she said, finally turning to look at James. Her gaze wasn't loving. It was inspecting, like a quality control manager looking at a defective product on an assembly line. She looked at his hoodie, his messy hair, his tired eyes, and she sneered. James is used to being uncomfortable. Look at him. He dresses like a teenager. He fits in back there with the noise and the crying babies and the cramped seats. I need space, Patricia. I need to network. I need to arrive fresh for my meetings. You understand, right, James? She said his name not as a question, but as a command, daring him to challenge her in public, knowing he hated confrontation more than anything. James looked at her. He looked at the woman he had vowed to protect, searching for a trace of a joke, a hint of irony, a glimmer of the woman he thought he had married. He found nothing but cold, calculating narcissism. He realized in that moment, with a clarity that hurt his chest, that she didn't see him as a husband or a partner. She saw him as an anchor, a dead weight she was dragging through her glamorous life, a necessary inconvenience who paid the bills but ruined the aesthetic. He didn't argue. He didn't cause a scene. He had learned long ago that fighting with Elena was like screaming at a wall. The wall didn't care, and you only lost your voice. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that masked the earthquake happening inside his soul. "If that's what you want, Elena," he said quietly, his voice rough, "enjoy the legroom." She didn't say thank you. She didn't squeeze his hand. She grabbed her new boarding pass, seat 1A, the golden ticket, and spun on her heel, marching toward the security checkpoint without waiting for him. She walked 10 paces ahead, maintaining a gap that told the world, "I am not with him. I am alone. I am important." James followed in her wake, holding his boarding pass for seat 34B, a middle seat in the very last row, right next to the lavatories, clutching it like a death sentence. The walk through the terminal was a blur of noise and color, but James felt like he was moving underwater. He watched Elena up ahead, breezing through the priority lane, flashing her pass, not once looking back to see if he was still there. He trudged through the general security line, taking off his shoes, removing his belt, enduring the indignity of the scanner while she waited on the other side, tapping her foot impatiently, checking her watch as if his existence was making her late for destiny. When he finally rejoined her, putting his shoes back on, she didn't greet him. She just turned and started walking toward gate 42. "Try to keep up," she muttered over her shoulder. "I want to board first so I can get a pre-flight drink." James looked at the back of her head, at the perfect, glossy hair that he knew cost $300 to style, and felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger anymore. It was pity. She was walking through an airport, blinded by her own ego, completely unaware of the world she was actually in. She saw terminals and gates and queues. James saw something else. He saw logistics. He saw fuel efficiency ratings. He saw turnaround times. He saw the intricate ballet of ground crews and air traffic control. He saw it because he lived it. As they reached the gate, the massive Boeing 777-300ER sat outside the window, a beast of engineering gleaming under the floodlights against the darkening sky. The livery on the tail was a deep midnight blue with a stylized golden eagle soaring upwards, the logo of Apex Airways. Elena glanced at the plane and saw a metal tube that would take her to London. James looked at the plane and saw his grandfather's dream realized. He saw the Apex Spirit, the very first 777 he had purchased when he took the company private 5 years ago. He saw the engine cowlings he had personally redesigned to reduce noise pollution. He saw the legacy he had built from a single cargo prop plane into a global luxury carrier. But Elena didn't know this. To Elena, James was a logistics consultant, a man who worked with shipping and spent his days looking at spreadsheets. She never asked for details. She never asked about his day. She only cared that the direct deposit hit the account on the 1st of every month. He had kept the truth hidden in the beginning to ensure she loved him for him, not the empire. And by the time he realized she loved the money more than the man, it was too late to tell her the truth without it sounding like a trap. So, he had stayed silent, waiting for a moment of redemption that never came. The boarding process was the second act in this theater of cruelty. As they walked down the jet bridge, the air grew cooler, smelling of recycled oxygen, aviation fuel, and cheap coffee. They reached the door of the aircraft, where the flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah with a bright professional smile, stood greeting passengers. She took one look at Elena's ticket and beamed, gesturing grandly to the left. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. First class is to your left. Let me help you with your coat." It was a gesture of deference, an invitation to a sanctuary of lie-flat pods, vintage champagne, and hushed silence. Sarah then looked at James's ticket, her smile faltering slightly into a sympathetic grimace as she pointed him to the right. "Welcome, sir. Economy is down that aisle, all the way to the back." Elena stopped at the precipice of the two worlds, the physical divide between the haves and the have-nots. She turned back to James one last time. She stepped close, her perfume, an expensive, overpowering scent of jasmine and ambition, filling his nose. She lowered her sunglasses, looking him up and down with a sneer. "Don't come up here bothering me asking for snacks or trying to talk," she whispered harshly, her voice dripping with venom. "It's embarrassing. Just stay in your lane, James." "This," she gestured with a manicured hand toward the plush leather seats visible through the opening, "is where people like me belong. People who matter. And back there," she pointed a thumb over her shoulder toward the crowded, noisy aisle of economy where people were shoving bags into overhead bins, "is what you deserve. Maybe sitting back there will motivate you to actually achieve something with your life." With that, she reached out and physically pulled the heavy blue curtain shut in his face. The fabric swished closed, sealing her off from him as effectively as a steel door. James stood there for a moment, staring at the blue fabric, the golden thread of the Apex logo woven into the material staring back at him. A queue of passengers began to form behind him, impatient sighs echoing in the small space. Sarah, the flight attendant, gave him a look of profound pity. "Right this way, sir," she said softly, her voice gentle. James adjusted his backpack, took a deep breath, and began the long walk of shame down the aisle. He bumped shoulders with eager tourists, dodged oversized carry-on bags being shoved into overhead bins, and navigated the chaotic energy of 300 people cramming into a metal tube. He walked past the exit rows, past the Economy Plus section, deeper and deeper into the belly of the beast. Seat 34B. It was exactly as bad as Elena had predicted. It was the middle seat in the very last row, directly in front of the lavatories, where the smell of chemical disinfectant was already strong. To his left sat a teenager named Leo, wearing massive noise-canceling headphones and tapping his foot to a frantic rhythm, his knees practically touching his chest. To his right sat an elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, clutching a rosary so tight her knuckles were white, her eyes squeezed shut in prayer before the engines had even started. The seat was tight, the air was stuffy, and the moment James sat down, the person in the seat in front of him reclined, jamming the plastic tray table into James's knees. It was a claustrophobic nightmare. But as the plane pushed back from the gate and the engines roared to life, pushing them into the sky, James didn't seem angry. He didn't fume. He didn't complain to the flight attendants. He sat quietly, buckled his seatbelt, and pulled a small leather-bound notebook from his backpack. He opened it to a page filled with sketches of turbine aerodynamics and profit margin projections. He was calm because he possessed a secret that was heavy enough to sink the entire plane. He looked around the cabin, not with disdain, but with care. He noticed the overhead light flickering in row 32, maintenance note, check wiring harness. He noticed the carpet fraying slightly near the galley, logistics note, schedule interior refit. He wasn't a passenger suffering, he was a creator observing his creation. He turned to Mrs. Gable, who let out a small whimper as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence during the ascent. "It's just a little thermal updraft, ma'am," James said soothingly, his voice calm and steady, carrying an authority that instantly relaxed her. "This aircraft, the 777-300ER, is designed to handle 10 times this amount of stress. It's like a bird riding the wind. The flex in the wings is actually a safety feature. You're perfectly safe." Mrs. Gable opened one eye, looking at him with teary, grateful eyes. "You know a lot about planes, young man," she whispered, her hands relaxing slightly on the rosary. James just smiled, a humble, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I read a lot," he lied gently, "and I trust the pilots. They're the best in the world." He spent the next hour talking to Leo about his video games, showing a genuine interest that the teenager clearly wasn't used to from adults. James was patient, humble, and kind, traits that had made him a billionaire, traits that built loyalty, but traits which his wife viewed as weaknesses to be exploited. Meanwhile, in the front of the plane, the atmosphere was a different universe entirely. Elena was settled into seat 1A, her shoes kicked off, her blazer draped over the hanger. She was on her third glass of vintage Dom Perignon, the bubbles tickling her nose as she laughed loudly at something the passenger next to her said. Her neighbor was a middle-aged businessman named Robert, a man in a sharp suit who looked like he regretted making eye contact with her the moment she sat down. Elena was holding court, desperate to impress him, desperate to validate her presence in the cabin. "My husband," she laughed, her voice carrying over the hum of the engines, piercing the quiet luxury of the cabin. "Oh God, don't ask. He's back in steerage, row 30-something. He's just dead weight, you know? He lacks vision. He's happy being average, living a small life. I'm the one with the drive. I'm the one who carries the brand of our family. Honestly, Robert, I'm thinking of leaving him after this trip. I need someone who matches my altitude, someone who belongs in a seat like this." Robert nodded uncomfortably, taking a sip of his sparkling water, trying to signal that he wanted to work. "Well, marriage is complicated," he muttered, turning back to his laptop. But Elena didn't catch the hint. She rolled her eyes, swirling her glass, feeling powerful, feeling untethered. She looked out the window at the clouds, imagining her new life, a life without James holding her back, a life of first-class tickets and endless upgrades. She snapped her fingers at a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me, this champagne is getting warm. I need a fresh glass. And bring some of those warm nuts. And make sure they are actually warm this time." The flight attendant forced a smile, a flash of annoyance in her eyes, but nodded. "Of course, ma'am." Elena leaned back, closing her eyes, basking in the service, completely unaware that the altitude she so craved was about to drop out from under her in the most spectacular way possible. Suddenly, the "Fasten Seatbelt" sign dinged off, but the cabin lights shifted from a warm amber to a bright, attentive white. The heavy, reinforced door of the cockpit clicked open. Usually, on a long-haul flight, the pilots remain hidden, mysterious voices over the intercom giving updates on wind speed and arrival times. But today, the curtain parted, and Captain Arthur Miller stepped out. Captain Miller was a legend in the aviation world, a senior pilot with 4 gold stripes on his shoulder epaulets and a face carved from granite. He had flown for the Air Force before joining Apex 20 years ago, and he commanded respect simply by walking into a room. He was a man of few words, known for his strict adherence to protocol and his fiercely protective nature over his crew and his aircraft. He adjusted his cap, straightened his tie, and walked straight into the first-class cabin. Elena straightened up immediately. She fixed her hair, reapplied her lipstick in a flash, and sat up in her pod. In her mind, the captain was coming to greet the VIPs. It happened in movies. He was probably coming to apologize for the turbulence or to thank her for being a loyal platinum member. She was, after all, the most glamorous woman in the cabin. She flashed her most charming, practiced smile as he approached her row, preparing a witty opening line about how much she loved the service. She was ready to be admired. "Good afternoon, Captain," she purred as he drew near, tilting her head to the side, extending her hand slightly, as if expecting it to be kissed. She expected him to stop, to bow, to acknowledge her presence in seat 1A. She prepared to tell him that the champagne was adequate, but could be colder. But Captain Miller didn't even blink. He didn't look at her hand. He didn't look at her face. He didn't look at Robert. He walked past her as if she were a ghost, as if she were part of the upholstery. He walked past the celebrities in row 2, He walked past the tech moguls in row 3. He walked with a singular, determined purpose straight toward the curtain that separated the classes. His eyes were fixed forward, his jaw set in a line of grim determination. He reached the blue curtain, the same curtain Elena had pulled shut an hour ago, and pushed through the fabric barrier, vanishing into the economy cabin. Elena's smile froze on her face. Her hand was still extended in the air, grasping at nothing. A confused frown replaced the smile. Why would the captain go back there? Was there a security threat? Was something wrong with the plane? Why did he ignore her? Driven by a mix of curiosity and a deep-seated need to be in the know, to be the first to know, Elena unbuckled her belt. "I need to use the restroom," she lied to Robert, who didn't look up. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and crept toward the curtain. She pulled it back just an inch, peeking through the gap to watch the scene unfold, expecting to see an arrest or a medical emergency. Instead, she saw the captain marching down the narrow aisle of economy, dodging beverage carts, his eyes scanning the seat numbers above the rows. He didn't stop at the exit rows. He didn't stop at the wings. He kept walking, deeper and deeper into the back of the plane, past the crying babies and the sleeping tourists, heading straight for the worst seats on the aircraft. He was heading for row 34. A murmur of confusion, thick and palpable, rippled through the economy cabin like a wave crashing against the shore as Captain Miller marched down the narrow aisle. Passengers craned their necks, whispering behind their hands, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. In the post-9/11 world, seeing the captain leave the cockpit mid-flight and storm toward the back of the plane usually meant only one thing: a security threat. A mother in row 20 pulled her child closer. A man in row 28 quickly shoved his laptop into his bag. The air in the cabin grew heavy with tension. Captain Miller ignored them all. He dodged the beverage carts that were hastily pulled aside by startled flight attendants, his eyes scanning the seat numbers above the rows with the precision of a hawk hunting in a canyon. 20. 25. 30. He didn't stop. He walked all the way to the very back of the plane, where the air was stale, the engine noise was a deafening roar, and the vibration of the fuselage rattled the teeth. He stopped at row 34. The entire rear cabin went silent. Even Leo, the teenager in 34A, sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure and slid his headphones off. Mrs. Gable, in 34C, stopped her prayers mid-Hail Mary, her eyes popping open. Everyone watched, holding their breath, as the captain of the aircraft removed his hat, tucked it respectfully under his arm, and stood at attention in the cramped aisle, blocking the view of the lavatories. He looked down at the man in the gray hoodie sandwiched in the middle seat, a man who looked like he didn't have a dollar to his name. "Mr. Sterling?" the captain asked, his voice deep and projecting clearly over the hum of the turbines, a voice that commanded immediate silence. James looked up from his leather-bound notebook. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look flustered. He closed the book gently, capped his pen with a satisfying click, and looked the pilot in the eye with a calm familiarity that shocked the surrounding passengers. "Hello, Miller," James said, his voice level, carrying the casual warmth of an old friend. "How's the crosswind over the Atlantic today? Felt a little chop back here around 30,000 feet. I assume the stabilizers are compensating." The passengers gasped. A collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen out of the room. This man in the cheap clothes, eating stale pretzels, knew the pilot, and not just knew him, spoke to him about flight dynamics like an equal. Captain Miller smiled, a rare, genuine expression of warmth and immense, unshakable respect that transformed his stern face. "Smooth sailing from here on out, sir. The stabilizers are holding steady. But I was reviewing the passenger manifest mid-flight and noticed a significant discrepancy. I saw your name listed in 34B. At first, I thought it was a system error. I couldn't believe it. The captain paused, looking around at the cramped seats, the lack of leg room, the sheer discomfort of the situation, and the indignity of the location next to the toilets. He shook his head, a look of genuine pain on his face. "I came to personally apologize, sir. The owner of Apex Airways should not be sitting next to the lavatory on his own fleet. It is a breach of protocol, and frankly, it is an embarrassment to me personally." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. It started in row 34 and rippled forward like a shockwave. The owner. The words hung in the air, defying gravity, heavier than the plane itself. Mrs. Gable dropped her rosary in her lap, her mouth forming a perfect O. Leo's jaw dropped, his video game forgotten. The flight attendants standing in the galley froze, their hands hovering over coffee pots. Eleanor, watching from the gap in the curtain 40 feet away, felt the blood drain from her face so fast it made her dizzy. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her knees went weak, and she had to grab the galley wall to stop from collapsing onto the carpet. Owner? The word echoed in her mind, smashing into the glass house of arrogance she had built over the last 3 years. James? Her James? The man she had called dead weight? The man she had just humiliated in front of an airport agent? The man she was planning to divorce because he lacked ambition? He owned the plane? He owned the airline? The realization hit her like a physical blow to the gut, a nausea rising in her throat that had nothing to do with turbulence. The dots connected instantly and violently. The logistics work, the late nights, the boring conferences, the way he looked at planes with love. He wasn't a worker. He was the architect. James unbuckled his seatbelt. The metallic click was the loudest sound in the cabin. He stood up, stretching his stiff legs, his gray hoodie suddenly looking less like a sign of poverty and more like the eccentric disguise of a titan who needed to prove nothing to anyone. He stood taller than the captain, his presence filling the cramped aisle. "It's no error, Miller," James said, his voice calm but commanding, carrying a weight of authority that silenced the whispering passengers. "My wife. She felt that economy was where I deserved to be. She told me I fit in back here. I didn't want to argue with her judgment. I thought perhaps I needed a reminder of what our customers experience. The legroom in row 34 could actually use another inch of pitch, don't you think? Make a note of that for the next board meeting." Captain Miller's eyes hardened. He was a loyal man. He had been with James since the beginning, since the days of hauling cargo and rusted props out of Anchorage. He knew James Sterling was a good man who paid his employees well and prioritized safety over profit. To hear he had been treated this way by his own wife sparked a protective, icy anger in the pilot. The captain looked down the long aisle toward the first-class curtain, spotting Eleanor's pale, terrified face peeking out. He locked eyes with her for a second, his expression filled with a cold judgment that withered her soul. "I see," the captain said, his voice clipped and professional, though the undertone was sharp as a blade. "Well, sir, that is unacceptable. Per company protocol, the owner's suite is prepped in the upper deck, the private quarters behind the cockpit. It's fully serviced, has a bed, and a satellite uplink. And the board of directors has been messaging. They are eager to discuss the London expansion plans upon landing. They were wondering why you weren't responding to the secure channel." James nodded slowly. He picked up his backpack, slinging it over one shoulder with an effortless grace. He turned to Mrs. Gable, who was staring at him as if he were an angel in disguise. "It was a pleasure meeting you, ma'am. Try the ginger ale for your nerves, it really helps." He turned to Leo. "Keep practicing those beats, kid, you've got talent." Then he looked at Captain Miller. "Lead the way, Captain. I think I've seen enough of row 34. As James began to walk up the aisle, something extraordinary happened. The sea of passengers parted for him. People pulled their legs in, sat up straighter, and looked at him with awe. The whispers followed him like the wake behind a ship, but they were no longer whispers of pity. "That's the owner?" He was sitting right there. "Did you hear what he said about his wife?" He walked through the Economy Plus section, past the galley, his head held high. He didn't look arrogant. He didn't gloat. He looked relieved, yes, but mostly he looked dignified. He looked like a man who had finally decided to stop apologizing for his existence. He approached the blue curtain, the barrier that Elena had used to separate herself from him, and Captain Miller held it open for him. James stepped through into the first-class cabin, entering the world he had built, the world he owned. Elena was still standing there, frozen, trapped between the world she had bought her way into and the reality she had just crashed into. Her face was a mask of ruin. The expensive makeup couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. She looked at James, really looked at him, for the first time in years. She didn't see the hoodie anymore. She saw the man. She saw the power she had been blind to, the strength she had mistaken for weakness. And she saw her future, a future of endless credit limits and private jets, slipping through her fingers like sand. Panic, primal and desperate, seized her chest. She stepped into the aisle, blocking his path to the cockpit. "James!" she stuttered, her voice cracking, reaching out a trembling hand to grab the sleeve of his hoodie, the same hoodie she had mocked an hour ago. "Baby, I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? I was just joking about the seat. You know I get stressed when I travel. You know I didn't mean it. I love you. I was saving the seat next to me for when the flight took off." Her voice rose in pitch, desperate, performing for the audience of first-class passengers who were now watching with rapt attention. Robert, the businessman she had been flirting with, was looking at her with pure disgust, pulling his legs away as if she were contagious. The celebrities in row 2 were watching over their sunglasses. She was the center of attention, just as she had always wanted, but it was the wrong kind of attention. It was the spotlight of a public execution. James stopped. He didn't pull away immediately. He let her hold his arm. He looked at her hand, noticing how her knuckles were white, clutching him like a drowning woman clutching a piece of driftwood. Then he looked up at her face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry panic. But James knew better now. He had seen behind the curtain. He knew that the panic wasn't about losing him. It was about losing the access to the wealth she had just discovered. It was about losing the status. It was about the realization that she had thrown away a diamond because she thought it was glass. "You weren't joking, Elena," James said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but in the silent cabin, where even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath, everyone heard it. "You were honest. You showed me exactly who you are when you think nobody is watching. You showed me how you treat people you think have no power. You told the agent I belonged in the back. You told me I was deadweight. You pulled this curtain in my face to protect your image." He gently but firmly peeled her fingers off his arm, one by one. It was a slow, deliberate motion, the physical dismantling of their marriage. Elena tried to hold on, her nails digging into the fabric, but his grip was stronger. "You wanted the first-class life, Elena. You wanted to be separated from the average people. You wanted to network with people of status." He released her hand, and it fell to her side, limp and useless. He took a step back, creating a distance between them that was wider than the Atlantic Ocean beneath them. "You can have it," James said, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a chilling finality. "Enjoy the champagne. I hear the vintage is excellent. I picked it out myself. Enjoy the lie-flat seat. I designed the ergonomics. Enjoy the status. But realize this. You are sitting in a seat that I built, on a plane that I own, flying to a city where I hold the keys. You wanted an upgrade? You got it. But upgrades come with a cost." Elena's eyes filled with tears, black mascara running down her cheeks, staining her perfect face. She looked small now, dwarfed by the magnitude of her mistake. "James, please," she whispered, her voice a broken rasp. "Don't do this. Not here. We can talk about this in London. We have reservations at the Savoy. We can fix this." James stepped past her, moving toward the secure, reinforced door of the cockpit where Captain Miller was waiting, holding the door open with the reverence of a palace guard. James paused on the threshold, one foot in his sanctuary, one foot still in her world. He looked back over his shoulder one last time. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked free. "My driver is meeting the plane on the tarmac," James said, his voice final, ringing like a bell. "But he only has instructions to pick up family. And it seems, Elena, that you prefer to travel solo." With that, James stepped into the private corridor. Captain Miller stepped in behind him, shooting one last look of disdain at Elena, and pulled the heavy door shut. Click. The sound was final. It was the sound of a vault closing. It was the sound of a life ending. Elena was left standing alone in the aisle, surrounded by the luxury she had craved, staring at the closed door. She turned around to face the cabin. The first-class passengers, the elite she so desperately wanted to impress, were all staring at her. They weren't looking at her with envy anymore. They were looking at her with pity and distaste. Even the flight attendant who had served her champagne looked away, unable to meet her eyes, busy rearranging a tray of napkins. Robert, her seatmate, pointedly put on his noise-canceling headphones and turned his body away from her, creating a wall of rejection. She sank into her seat, seat 1A, the most expensive seat on the plane, and realized it was the loneliest place on earth. The leather felt cold against her skin. The champagne in her glass had gone flat. She had upgraded her ticket, but she had downgraded her life. For the remaining 6 hours of the flight, she sat in silence, trapped in a golden cage of her own making. Every time a flight attendant passed, she flinched, expecting to be kicked off, but they simply ignored her, treating her with a professional invisibility that was worse than rudeness. She tried to sleep, but her mind was racing, replaying every insult, every sneer, every moment she had taken James for granted. She realized now that his humility wasn't a lack of ambition. It was a lack of need for validation. He didn't need to show off because he was the show, and she had missed the show entirely. When the plane finally began its descent into Heathrow, cutting through the grey London fog, the reality of her situation began to set in. The wheels touched down with a smooth thud. The stabilizers James had joked about doing their job perfectly. As the plane taxied to the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. We ask that you remain seated while we taxi. We will be deplaning shortly. However, we have a special protocol today. A private car is waiting on the tarmac for our chairman. We ask for your patience as he disembarks first." Elena looked out the window. Down on the wet tarmac, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting next to the stairs, flanked by 2 security SUVs. A man in a suit stood holding an umbrella. The cockpit door opened. James emerged, wearing his backpack over his hoodie. He didn't look left. He didn't look right. He walked straight to the exit door, which was opened by the ground crew. He walked down the stairs into the cool London air. The man with the umbrella rushed to cover him. James got into the back of the Rolls-Royce. He didn't look up at the window of seat 1A. The car door closed, and the convoy drove away, disappearing into the mist. Inside the plane, the seatbelt sign dinged off. The passengers stood up, retrieving their bags. Elena sat there for a long moment, unable to move. She finally grabbed her purse, her hands trembling. She walked off the plane, alone. She walked through the jet bridge alone. She went through customs, alone. When she reached the baggage claim, she stood by the carousel, watching the bags circle endlessly. She looked around, a tiny, foolish part of her hoping he might be there, hoping it was just a lesson, a scare. But he wasn't there. She walked out to the curb, the cold London rain hitting her face, ruining her hair, stinging her eyes. She checked her phone. No messages. She checked her bank app. The joint account, the one connected to the platinum card, was gone. It had been unlinked. She had her own personal savings, which amounted to enough for a week in a hotel and an economy ticket home. She stood on the curb, watching the black cabs drive by, watching couples reunite and hug, watching the world keep turning. She had wanted to arrive in London as a queen. Instead, she stood there shivering in her designer blazer, a woman who had traded a kingdom for a seat with extra legroom. Realizing too late, that the destination matters far less than the person sitting next to you.